Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
A summit between Donald Trump and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has ended early without agreement. A signing ceremony was cancelled at short notice because President Trump said the US refused North Korean demands for all sanctions against them to be lifted. In the past few minutes, the North Koreans have denied this. Despite the abrupt end of talks, Mr. Trump claimed the relationship between the two men remains strong. Our North America editor John Sopel reports from Vietnam.
It all seemed to be going so well. President Trump and Chairman Kim wandering through the gardens of a smart Hanoi hotel. The pair apparently relaxed and getting on. And then a small piece of history. A reporter shouted a question at the North Korean dictator, something that doesn't happen in Pyongyang, and he answered.
Chairman Kim, are you ready to denuclearize?
김 위원장님, 비핵화 준비되셨습니까?
그런 의지가 없다고는 여기 오지 않았을 겁니다.
If I'm not willing to do that, I won't be here right now.
That's a good answer.
But then the rumours started to circulate that things were going awry. There'd be programme changes, the White House told us.
The talks had been due to go on all morning, and then, according to the White House schedule, there was going to be lunch and a signing ceremony. But it all fell apart. It's hard to overstate what a failure it is that after 8.5 months of talks, a draft agreement, the principles flying in, and then everything turning to dust.
As the delegations went their separate ways, it looked as though Kim Jong-un had overplayed his hand in demanding full sanctions relief, and Donald Trump had overestimated his persuasive skills in getting the Koreans to denuclearize. So it was a rueful Donald Trump who appeared at his news conference.
They were willing to denuke a large portion of the areas that we wanted, but we couldn't give up all of the sanctions for that.
I suggested there might be another explanation.
Mr. President, do you think it was premature to have held the summit when all these things had not been tied down? I mean, in the White House schedule last night, it said signing agreement today. And I wonder whether, as a follow-up question, whether you could just sketch out what the next few months look like. Thank you.
You always have to be prepared to walk. I could have signed an agreement today, and then you people would have said, oh, what a terrible deal, what a terrible thing he did. No, you have to be prepared to walk. And, you know, there was a potential we could have signed something today. I could have 100% signed something today. We actually had papers ready to be signed.
The one thing that wasn't fast was Kim Jong-un's 60 hours on a train getting here from Pyongyang, regular cigarette breaks on the way. Surely he'd been hoping for more. And Donald Trump hadn't travelled halfway around the world to return back to the US empty-handed. But he is. John Sopel, BBC News, Hanoi.
President Trump, the self-proclaimed deal maker, is returning home with no deal tonight after abruptly ending his nuclear summit with Kim Jong-un. The leader of North Korea had wanted all sanctions lifted in return for decommissioning one nuclear plant, something the US said it couldn't accept. Mr. Trump left the talks in Vietnam, saying, sometimes you have to walk. From Hanoi, here's our Asia correspondent, Debbie Edward.
The day began with smiles and laughter. Kim Jong-un for the first time answering questions from foreign journalists.
And let me assure you that I will do all my best to bring a good result ultimately today.
The two men appeared at ease as they strolled through the grounds of the hotel towards the negotiating table. And the discussions got underway with Kim declaring he wouldn't be in Hanoi if he wasn't ready to denuclearize.
That might be the best answer you've ever heard.
But 2 hours later, at the time we'd been told a signing ceremony would take place, the two leaders got in their cars and went their separate ways. President Trump, on this occasion, failing to get a deal done.
Basically, they wanted the sanctions lifted in their entirety, and we couldn't do that. They were willing to denuke a large portion of the areas that we wanted, but we couldn't give up all of the sanctions for that. So we continue to work, and we'll see, but we had to walk away from that particular suggestion. We had to walk away from that.
At which point did it become clear to you that you wouldn't be getting a deal here in Hanoi, and therefore was it a mistake to come
No, I think
here?
the language was good all throughout. The language has been good even now, but, you know, I don't go by language.
Tonight, the North Koreans claimed they had offered to dismantle all of their nuclear production facilities in exchange for partial sanctions relief. For President Trump, even his hasty departure didn't go to plan. The stairs to Air Force One had to be manually removed, delaying his takeoff. A second summit cut short in stalemate. This was not what he flew to Vietnam to achieve. Debbie Edward, ITV News, Hanoi.
So, no deal. President Trump was widely expected to announce some sort of agreement with his new best friend, Kim Jong-un. So the abrupt nature of his departure came as a shock. Mr. Kim is reported to have asked for all US sanctions on North Korea to be lifted. Mr. Trump said that was not possible and that sometimes you have to walk. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Jonathan Miller has this report.
The mood was good. Expectations were high, with the US dealmaker-in-chief's fawning over a murderous despot armed with missiles and nukes finally yield a result. Could a deal to denuclearize North Korea bring Kim Jong-un in from the cold? And would today go down in history as the Hanoi Peace Agreement of 2019? The two brothers-in-arms held a media briefing.
There are people who remain skeptical about this meeting. There must be people who watch us having a wonderful time, like a scene from a fantasy movie.
We had very good discussions last night at dinner, and the pre-dinner was very good, and there are a lot of great ideas being thrown about. I think very importantly, the relationship is, you know, just very strong. And when you have a good relationship, a lot of good things happen.
Kim was asked if he was confident that a deal could be done.
It's too early to tell, but I wouldn't say I'm pessimistic. Right now, I have a feeling that good results will come out of this.
Halfway through the morning, the great leader and the president emerged to take the air. They looked very relaxed. Marshal Kim's command of English is unclear, but he did chuckle in response to something Trump said. Incredible, really. Less than 18 months ago, Kim was test-firing ICBMs that could hit the US and detonating what experts agreed was an H-bomb. Kim had called Trump a mentally deranged dotard, and Trump called Kim a sick puppy, a madman. It had felt like the brink of war. Now, North Korea was bargaining for the lifting of crippling sanctions. The US for a commitment from Kim that his nuclear enrichment facilities would be dismantled.
Everybody having a good time?
Back round the table, a reporter called out, "Chairman Kim, are you ready to denuclearize?" His response, "If I wasn't, I wouldn't be here right now."
That's a good answer. Wow, that might be the best answer you've ever heard.
Few have really ever heard Kim Jong-un talk off the cuff like this before. But not long after that, the two of them failed to turn up for lunch. It was all over. The summit had collapsed, expectations dashed, no deal. There was no final statement, just a solo appearance from Trump.
They were willing to denuke a large portion of the areas that we wanted, but we couldn't give up all of the sanctions for that. So we continue to work and we'll see, but we had to walk away from that particular suggestion. We had to walk away from that.
North Korea's foreign minister later gave a very different account, insisting that they'd only proposed the removal of sanctions affecting civilians. In exchange, he said, the North would permanently and completely dismantle its Yongbyon plutonium and uranium facilities. The Pyongyang regime has agreed to shut down Yongbyon before. In 2008, they stopped production and blew up a cooling tower. A year later, they tested a nuclear bomb. Kim Jong-un has now left Vietnam, empty-handed. But Trump tonight told the South Korean and Japanese leaders that he hadn't walked out completely. He would continue to talk, he said. For Donald Trump, this was the art of the no deal. No result, But he'd stood firm, no soft touch after all, in the face of a troublesome autocrat, a liar, a conman, a cheat. He began the long-haul flight home to face down his ex-lawyer's claims that he was all of those too.
Jonathan Miller reporting. Well, earlier I spoke to Jean Lee in Washington, D.C. She was the first journalist to open a bureau in Pyongyang 7 years ago. I started by asking her, what could we tell about how the meeting had really gone from the language that the North Korean leader actually used?
When you look at or hear what President Trump had to say about what happened, it is very confusing because Kim Jong-un seemed very comfortable toward the end. They did have a somewhat friendly, didn't seem like an unfriendly parting, and yet we would assume that these talks broke down to a point where they both walked away.
I mean, would you regard this as kind of a pause or a serious break?
I hope that this is a pause. I am watching and waiting to see what North Korean state media puts out. You know, it's already well into their day and they still haven't posted news about what happened in Hanoi. And I think that will help us understand how they're going to shape this narrative to their own people. And what I hope is that North Korea will portray this as part of negotiations with the United States and that they share this ultimate goal of hashing out a deal. What we don't want to see is for them to shut themselves off, turn away from this whole process, and perhaps even look for a reason to return to provocation. It's looking like that's not going to happen. The fact that the foreign minister came out and gave a press conference is very promising. It does sound like he wants to put his version of events out there. And so let's hope that there's a bit of a pause, but they get back on track, and that this is a process that moves forward from this point.
Is it actually fundamentally realistic to think that North Korea will ever get rid of its nuclear weapons?
So the idea that Kim Jong-un, who has staked his entire leadership, all of his legitimacy on the nuclear weapon, that the idea that he will give that up readily is far-fetched. His people have gone for years deprived of the very basics, clean water, food, electricity, heat, infrastructure, so that he could pour those resources into this nuclear weapon. So he wants it to pay off. However, I do think he's willing to barter off small pieces of it in exchange for concessions, both diplomatic and economic. And that is what he's trying to do. And so the United States also has to be aware that he's looking at this as a big, long process, as something that he's going to chip away at. He's going to try to give away as little as he can and try to get as much as he can in return.
But of course, his opponent, Mr. Trump, wants a quick clean out of nuclear weapons, a quick restoration consequent upon that of a lifting of sanctions, and Bob's your uncle. But he's clearly impatient.
Well, you know, he only has a couple years left. Unless he wins the next election. He understands that time is short. He also has some domestic issues at home, so he's probably looking for something to distract from them. He does want a quick victory. He didn't get that this time. I do think, though, that one thing that is good about this process is just getting those negotiating teams talking. Hopefully what we'll see is that they continue this process and that those lines of communication are not permanently closed, because that would certainly be very, very disastrous for the region if we revert back to what we had in 2017.
Jean Lee, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.